Usually when we try to map out human history, there's this expectation of like total precision.
Right. Yeah.
Feels like archaeology, you know? You
Like,
dig into the earth, you brush away the dirt, and you find a jagged piece of flint or maybe a broken piece of pottery.
exactly. Or the foundation of a stone wall.
Yeah, and the historian just points at it and says, like, there it is. That's where they lived. That's what they ate.
It's very tangible.
Right. We put that piece of flint in a glass display case. We add a little brass plaque and we call it history because we like things to be visible. I mean, we want our past to be categorized and solid.
Well, sure. I mean, it gives us a sense of control over time, right? We really rely on those tangible artifacts to anchor our understanding of who we were.
But then you step into the world of human consciousness.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole different thing.
It really is. You try to map out what people were actually experiencing inside their minds, say, 50,000 years ago, and suddenly that glass display case is just completely empty.
Yeah, you're looking at a historical landscape that is entirely invisible.
Totally. It is the absolute definition of murky waters. And for everyone listening right now, that is the mission of today's deep dive. We are taking this incredibly massive stack of sources, archaeological research, anthropological studies, ancient texts, psychological journals, and we're tracing a single mind-bending human practice.
Which scholars generally call the soul flight, or spirit communication.
Right. And it's just wild how deep this goes.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we are really tracking is the human drive to transcend ordinary reality. And that drive, it's just universal.
It's everywhere.
It really is. It seems to be practically hardwired into our biology.
Yeah.
But the methods we use to achieve that transcendence and the meanings we assign to it, they've evolved in some pretty startling ways over the millennia.
So we're basically going to trace this all the way from the campfires of Stone Age hunter-gatherers right through to the monumental pyramids of Egypt.
And into the quiet cloisters of Christian mystics.
Yeah, all the way to modern psychology and like the literature sitting on your bookshelf right now. Because the incredible thing to me is that these ancient shamanic roots didn't just disappear when we invented agriculture
No, that at all.
or when we started building cities. They fundamentally shaped major world religions like Buddhism and Christianity. They built esoteric practices like Qigong. And they entirely shaped how a modern therapist sitting across from you in a leather chair today understands your psyche.
It's a continuous thread.
Exactly. By the end of this deep dive, you're going to look at everything from your own dreams to your favorite epic novels in a completely different light because you're actually participating in a tradition that is thousands and thousands of years old.
Yeah, and to truly understand how deeply embedded this is, we kind of have to wind the clock all the way back.
Back to the Paleolithic era.
Right, the Stone Age. We need to define what we actually mean by shamanism. Because anthropologists and historians, they often consider this to be the world's oldest profession.
Older than the ones we usually joke about, right?
Much older. And honestly, far more critical to early survival. You really have to place yourself in that environment.
To picture it.
Yeah, imagine a world where survival was just a daily, perilous question mark. These were very small, closely knit hunter-gatherer cultures. And they were entirely at the mercy of unpredictable natural forces.
Right, like weather patterns, animal migrations, sudden diseases.
Exactly. It was an environment defined by chaos and a total lack of control.
Because there's no, meteorology app to tell you if a blizzard is coming next week.
No.
There's no supply chain. I mean, if the reindeer don't migrate through your valley, your entire community just starves.
And that level of intense existential pressure, it requires a pressure valve.
Yeah.
So the shaman emerged as the individual in the tribe who acted as this sole mediator between humanity and this chaotic universe of spirits, omens, and natural forces.
They were the go-between.
Exactly. Their primary job was to interpret the invisible, to negotiate with the forces that controlled the food supply and health. And to do that, they operated within what scholars like Mircea Eliade call the archetypal cosmological model.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you're a Stone Age shaman looking up at the night sky, you aren't seeing a vacuum of space, right? You are seeing a structure. So what does this universe actually look like to them?
Well, it's actually remarkably consistent across incredibly diverse, isolated cultures globally. It is essentially a three-storied universe, a three-tiered cosmos.
3 tiers.
Yeah, you have an upper world, a middle world, which is the Earth, where we live our ordinary waking lives, and a lower world, or underworld.
Okay.
And the fundamental belief is that these realms are deeply interconnected. So The beings, the spirits, or the ancestors residing in the upper or lower world, they can heavily influence the middle world.
Like they can bring illness or prevent a successful hunt.
Right, or they can offer profound life-saving wisdom.
But it's not like these three worlds are just sitting next to each other like neighboring countries. They are physically stacked. So how does the shaman physically or, spiritually move from the middle world to the upper world? There aren't stairs.
No, no stairs. They utilize a concept known as the axis mundi. This translates roughly to the world axis or the world tree.
The world tree, I've heard that term.
Yeah, think of it as a central connecting pillar that links all three tiers of reality. In a lot of tribal myths, this axis passes through a kind of cosmic hole right at the center of the universe.
I always picture this as a sort of cosmic elevator, like it runs straight up and down through the center of the building. But the shaman is the only person in the tribe who has the key to actually open the doors and operate the buttons.
The cosmic elevator is a highly accurate way to visualize it. And what's interesting is that the architecture of that elevator varies depending on the culture, even though the function is identical. Well, for instance, if you look at the Altai people in Siberia, their cosmological map is incredibly complex. They don't just have one upper floor.
Oh, really?
No, they sometimes envision 7 or even 9 distinct heavens stacked on top of each other.
Wow. So the shaman has to navigate past floor 3 just to get to the spirit they need on floor 7.
Precisely. The journey requires real stamina and navigation skills.
Yeah.
And if we look at ancient Norse cosmology, which is geographically and culturally distinct from Siberia, we see a striking variation of this exact same model.
The Norse myths, right, with Odin and Thor.
Right. They conceptualized Ur's well, which represented the primordial nurturing wellspring of all life and fate, and that sat at the base of the world tree, Yggdrasil. The Norse also deeply revered burial mounds or barrows, believing the conscious dead continued to reside within them.
Wait, so the dead are just gone. They're actively sitting in the basement waiting for a call.
Basically, yeah, they are accessible. A practitioner of Norse magic, known as a Siakona, might perform a specific ritual called utiseta.
Utiseta.
Yeah, which literally translates to sitting out. They would physically sit on top of a burial mound throughout the night to enter a trance. The mound itself acted as a localized axis mundi.
Like a local access point to the elevator.
Exactly. It was an access point to hack into that cosmic elevator and connect with the powerful ancestor buried beneath, usually seeking protection or prophetic wisdom.
So you're just sitting alone on a grave in the freezing dark to force your consciousness downward. That kind of brings up the mechanical question for me. How exactly does the shaman push the button on the elevator? Because if you're a normal person, you just sit on a grave and get cold. How do they actually trigger this soul flight?
Right. Well, they utilize what Billy had termed psychotechnologies.
Psychotechnology.
Yeah. We tend to think of technology as silicon chips and smartphones, but a psychotechnology is a specific, culturally developed tool or strategy used to fundamentally alter the human state of consciousness.
Okay, so a tool for the mind.
Right. The goal is to achieve ecstasy, which, if we look in its original Greek meaning ecstasis, literally means to stand outside of oneself. And the sheer diversity of these methods across the globe is staggering.
When you say psychotechnology, my mind immediately goes to the cinematic version, drumming. You picture the shaman beating a drum around a fire, the rhythm getting faster and faster.
Drumming is foundational, absolutely. Rhythmic drumming, chanting, and repetitive dancing are among the most common psychotechnologies globally. And there is a deep neurological reason for this.
Really? Like it actually changes the brain?
It does. A repetitive rhythm at a specific frequency literally entrains the brain. It causes changes in the electrical activity, shifting your brain waves from the normal waking beta state into slower alpha and theta states.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it essentially forces the prefrontal cortex, the logical, calculating part of your brain, to quiet down. And that frees the superconscious from ordinary awareness. It dissolves the rigid boundaries of the mundane world.
I mean, if you've ever been to an intense live music concert and felt that bass in your chest, you know exactly what that feels like. The music washes over you, you lose track of time, your sense of a separate self kind of blurs into the crowd.
Exactly.
That feels like a mild, modern version of this ancient technology.
It is the exact same biological mechanism. But, ancient traditions pushed it much further than a modern concert. Some relied on extreme sensory deprivation.
Like sensory deprivation tanks.
Kind of, yeah. Imagine isolating yourself in a pitch-black silent cave for a week. Without sensory input, the brain begins to generate its own reality to fill the void, which leads to profound hallucinations. Other cultures use sleep deprivation or extreme physical endurance.
Just pushing the body to the absolute limit. I've read about nomadic tribes on the North American plains who historically used severe pain as a route into trance, suspending themselves by hooks in their skin, for example.
Yes, the sun dance is a very well-known example of that. It simultaneously demonstrated their physical prowess and their total dedication to the spirits, and it mechanically forced their consciousness to snap.
Wow.
And on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you find the Kapula shamans of India. They traditionally entered these non-ordinary states via prolonged sexual ecstasy, using intense pleasure rather than pain to overwhelm the nervous system.
So the underlying logic seems to be that normal everyday consciousness is just a stubborn lock on the door.
Right.
You have to pick the lock, and you can either do it by starving the senses completely or overloading them so massively with pain, pleasure, or rhythm that the system just crashes and reboots into a different state.
Biologically, a system crash and reboot is an excellent way to describe it.
Yeah.
And modern science totally validates the efficacy of these methods. Traditional methods of trance induction, intense dancing, hyperventilating, enduring pain, they promote a massive release of endorphins in the human brain.
Endorphins, those are the body's natural painkillers, right? Like when you go for a long run and get that runner's high.
Exactly. They are endogenous opiates, meaning opiates produced naturally within the body, which actually gives a rather ironic, literal biological twist to Karl Marx's famous critique that religion is the opium of the people.
Oh, wow. Literal opium in the brain.
Yes. When a practitioner engages in these intense psychotechnologies, their brain literally bathes itself in natural opiates. This produces a state of altered consciousness characterized by euphoria, visions, and analgesia, which is the inability to feel pain.
So they were biochemically hacking their own nervous systems tens of thousands of years before we even conceptualized what a brain chemical was. They just knew the technique produced the result.
Right. They mapped the inner landscape through pure trial and error over generations. We also have to acknowledge the ingestion of entheogens, or psychoactive plants and fungi.
Like psychedelics.
Yes. In Siberia, the use of the Amanita muscaria, the fly agaric mushroom, was incredibly widespread. It induced powerful, ecstatic visions, a feeling of immense physical strength, and direct communication with the divine.
Your red mushroom with white spots. Right.
That's the one. And what is fascinating historically is that the vivid structural visions caused by this specific mushroom, which often involved journeys through layers of clouds or realms of spirits, they later heavily influenced traditional folkloric descriptions of heavenly realms in both Christian and Islamic traditions in the surrounding regions.
Wait, really? The mushroom visions shaped the theology.
The visions provided the vocabulary for the theology, yes.
That is wild. But taking on this role, becoming the person who constantly overloads their nervous system to talk to spirits, it doesn't sound like a comfortable life. It's not a career you casually choose.
Definitely not.
The sources talk extensively about the shamanic initiation crisis, what actually happens to a person to make them the shaman.
The calling is almost never voluntary. It is usually described as a brutal, terrifying vocation triggered by a severe personal crisis.
Like what kind of crisis?
This could be a life-threatening physical illness, a period of what the community would view as temporary insanity, or a profound psychological breakdown. The future shaman experiences this not as a metaphor, but as a literal death and dismemberment.
Dismemberment.
Yes. In their visions, their soul descends into the underworld, they are torn apart by animal spirits or ancestors, their flesh is stripped away, and then they are reborn, reassembled with a new identity, new organs, and new spiritual authority.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic for a moment here. If I am a Stone Age hunter, and I see a guy in my tribe convulsing on the ground, screaming about being torn apart by ghost wolves, isn't some of that inherently performative?
That's a fair point.
Like, isn't it a theatrical way to convince the rest of the tribe that he actually has this invisible power he claims to have?
It's a vital question. Anthropologists have debated this endlessly, and they generally agree that yes, there is a highly performative aspect to shamanism.
Yeah.
But calling it performative doesn't mean it's fake.
Okay, explain that.
Well, the visible radical transformation of the shaman during their initiation and later during their healing trances is necessarily theatrical because of the social dynamics of the tribe.
Because if the tribe doesn't believe he has the power, his placebo effect is basically zero.
Exactly. By visibly transforming, by enduring pain, by changing their voice or convulsing, the shaman is providing tangible, dramatic evidence to the community.
They're proving it.
Right. They are demonstrating, I am currently interacting with terrifying invisible forces that you cannot see, and I am surviving it. The performance builds their credibility. Shamanic healing is deeply psychological. It requires the absolute belief of the patient and the community.
Makes sense.
If the community doesn't buy into the shaman's authority, the social and psychological realignment simply won't occur. So the performance is an integral part of the cure.
The theater creates the reality for the tribe.
Okay, so we have this vivid picture of the Stone Age. You have egalitarian tribes living on the edge of survival in chaotic nature. The shaman acts as this raw, ecstatic, deeply personal conduit to the spirit world.
But as we know, human history doesn't stay in the Paleolithic. We invent farming. So what happens to this raw, ecstatic soul flight when humans stop wandering and start planting wheat?
Well, the invention of agriculture triggers the Bronze Age. And with this massive shift in how humans physically live, we see a parallel, massive shift in how they conceptualize the universe.
How so?
We transition from the chaotic, unpredictable world of the hunter-gatherer to the highly structured, predictable world of the farmer. This births what scholars call the continuous cosmos.
A continuous cosmos. Break that down for me. How does a farmer view the universe differently than a hunter?
Well, for a hunter, time is sporadic. You find food or you don't. For a farmer, time becomes strictly cyclical.
Right, because of the crops.
Exactly. It is inextricably tied to the seasons, the annual flooding of the rivers, the planting of seeds, the harvest, and the predictable movement of the stars. In a continuous cosmos, there is a deep, unbroken mechanical connectedness between the natural world, human society, and the realm of the gods.
It's all one big system.
Right. And because human society was becoming rigidly hierarchical with the invention of kings, standing armies, tax collectors, and administrators, the spiritual world was suddenly imagined as hierarchical too.
It's a mirror. If my earthly life is run by a bureaucracy of kings and tax collectors, heaven must be run by a bureaucracy of gods, which means the raw, spontaneous, convulsing shaman is suddenly out of a job. Or at least their job gets extremely corporate.
That is precisely what happens. The egalitarian, individualistic, trance-based rituals of the Stone Age evolve into formal, structured religious priesthoods.
They got organized.
Very organized. The state still needed individuals to mediate with the gods, but now was a matter of national security, economic stability, and maintaining the vast cosmic order. It wasn't just about finding a herd of deer anymore. It was about ensuring the sun rose and the river flooded on time.
In that kind of structured society, wisdom and political power fuse together. If you know how the cosmic machine works, you are the one pulling the levers of society.
Wisdom became entirely power-oriented. In Bronze Age civilizations, to be a wise person meant learning the complex rituals required to acquire and maintain power within this continuous system.
Like in Egypt.
Ancient Egypt is the ultimate manifestation of this. The pharaoh wasn't just a political ruler holding a scepter. He was literally viewed as a god on earth. To the Egyptian mindset, this wasn't political propaganda or a metaphor. The difference between a human being and a god was essentially just a difference in their level of power and function within the cosmos.
So if the universe is a giant repeating machine, the pharaoh is the chief mechanic.
Right.
How did they view the individual human soul in a society that rigid? Did they still believe a soul could fly out of the body and go on journeys, or did that get locked down too?
They absolutely believed in a mobile soul, but the concept became highly formalized and intricately mapped.
Okay, how did they map it?
The Egyptians believed a human being was a composite of several distinct spiritual components. Two of the most critical were the Ka and the Ba.
Common Ba.
Yes. The Ka is usually translated as the vital life force. Think of it as the foundational spark of life that animates the body. But the Ba is where it gets incredibly fascinating regarding our theme of soul flight.
Tell me about the Ba.
In texts like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Ba is depicted visually as a bird with a human head.
A human-headed bird, that is such a specific, arresting piece of iconography.
The visual symbolism is brilliant. It represents both human nature and identity, that's the face, and mobility and freedom, which are the wings.
I see.
The Egyptians believed that the Ba lived on after physical death and had the power to physically fly out of the tomb to join the Ka in the afterlife, partake in offerings, and then return. Crucially, they also believed the Ba could be temporarily released during sleep, traveling the realms while the physical body rested.
Wait, if you're listening to this, think about your own dreams last night. When you dream you are flying, or visiting a childhood home, or talking to someone who has passed away, the ancient Egyptians would say that isn't just your brain firing random synapses. That is your beba literally sprouting wings and leaving your bed to travel.
Exactly.
It perfectly mirrors the ancient shamanic concept of the free soul journeying. It's the exact same idea, just wearing Egyptian Bronze Age clothing.
It is the same underlying human experience of consciousness temporarily unmooring itself from the body, contextualized differently. To really see the contrast in how environment shapes these ideas, compare the monumental Egyptian Ba to the sole concept of an indigenous hunting culture that survived into modern times, like the Inuit in the Arctic.
Oh, how did the Inuit see it?
The traditional Inuit belief system describes something called the Pudlak.
Puglak, what is that?
It is conceptualized as a sort of compressed air bubble, roughly the size of a small bird's egg, located physically inside the human body. And inside this little bubble of air is a miniature, perfect replica of the individual, only a few centimeters tall.
That is incredibly vivid. So I have a tiny version of myself floating in a bubble in my chest.
Yes, and here's the poetic part. This bubble contains the exact air of your very first cry as a newborn baby.
Wow.
That air is borrowed from Sela. Sela is the great animating atmosphere, the universal life force, the wind and the weather of the world. It is the breath of the Arctic.
And what happens when they die?
When an Inuit person dies, that internal bubble bursts.
Oh, wow.
The life-giving air inside rushes back out into the atmosphere, returning instantly to Sela. It's a beautiful microcosmic idea of integration. The soul isn't a royal bird flying out of a limestone pyramid built by thousands of slaves. It is simply a bubble of borrowed breath returning to the harsh, freezing wind of the Arctic tundra.
It perfectly reflects their environment. A culture surrounded by endless ice and howling wind visualizes the soul as a captured breath of that wind. But whether it's a bird navigating the afterlife or a bubble merging with the atmosphere, the core human insight remains identical. There's a part of us that is mobile. There's a part of us that transcends the physical flesh.
That intuition is universal, but history marches forward. And roughly around the 8th to the 3rd century BCE, we hit a massive, shattering paradigm shift in human history.
What happens then?
Philosophers and historians refer to this era as the Axial Age. And what happens here completely rewrites the human operating system. The continuous cosmos of the Bronze Age breaks down.
It shatters. How? If I'm a farmer in the Axial Age, what changes for me?
What's fascinating here is that humanity shifts to a brand new way of understanding reality. The philosopher Charles Taylor coined a term for this transition. He called it the Great Disembedding.
The Great Disembedding.
Yes. For thousands of years, humans were deeply embedded in the cycles of nature, the state, and the gods. They were all one continuous loop. In the Axial Age, humanity started to conceptualize a massive divide. Reality was split into two distinct realms, the everyday world and the real world.
Okay, let's look at this two-world mythology. The everyday world is just normal life, right? Paying taxes, planting crops, getting sick.
Exactly. But suddenly, the everyday world is viewed not as the ultimate reality, but as chaotic, full of untrained minds, inherent suffering, illusion, and violence. It is seen as a flawed copy or a trap.
And the real world?
The real world is conceptualized as an unseen realm of true, enlightened reality, perfect forms, or divine light. It is where wise minds can see things without delusion.
Okay, I see the split.
The profound shift is that meaning was no longer found by fitting perfectly into the agricultural cycles of the state. Meaning was now found by escaping the everyday world and connecting to this higher, true reality.
You know, it's like realizing you've been on a stage acting in a play your entire life, and suddenly you look past the stage lights and see the audience and the director. You realize the play is just an illusion, and the real world is out there in the dark theater. You have to break the fourth wall.
That is a fantastic analogy. The Axial Age was the moment human philosophy broke the fourth wall. And this is exactly where the ancient concept of soul flight gets hijacked, or, to use an evolutionary biology term, exapted.
Exapted. Like when a dinosaur develops feathers originally for warmth, but millions of years later, those same feathers are used for flying. The tool stays the same, but the function changes completely.
Precisely. Ancient philosophers took the ancient shamanic technique of literal outward soul flight, which remember was historically used for community healing, finding game, or navigating the physical underworld, and they exapted it.
What did they do with it?
They turned the flight inward. Soul flight became a metaphor and an active method for achieving inner self-transcendence. It was the vehicle to escape the illusion of the everyday world and reach the enlightened real world.
So instead of flying to the upper world to ask the rain gods to water the crops, you are flying upward in your own mind to become a better, more enlightened human being. The journey becomes personal and philosophical.
Exactly. We see this incredibly clearly in ancient Greece with the mystery religion of Orphism.
Orphism.
Yeah, it traces its roots to the legendary poet and musician Orpheus. The core myth says Orpheus physically descended into Hades, the underworld, to rescue his dead wife Eurydice.
Right, the classic Greek myth.
Structurally, this is a classic shamanic catabasis, a descent into the lower world. But the religion that built around this myth taught something entirely new for the Greek world. They taught that the human soul is essentially divine, but it is trapped in the physical body due to a primordial sin or tragedy.
The soul is a divine spark locked in a physical prison.
Right. They believe that when the body dies, the soul is briefly liberated, only to be forced back into a new body. They call this the circle of necessity or the wheel of birth, a concept of reincarnation, very similar to ideas developing simultaneously in India.
So how does soul flight fit into that?
The ultimate goal of the Orphic practitioner wasn't just to heal a cough, it was to live a deeply purified ascetic life so that their soul could eventually fly out of this exhausting cycle of rebirth and ascend back to its divine stellar origin.
To break the wheel. And then you have Pythagoras. Most of us just know him as the guy who tortured us in high school geometry with his triangle theorem.
A squared plus b squared equals c squared is just the tip of the iceberg with Pythagoras. He was far more than a mathematician. He was a profound mystic and cult leader.
Really?
Oh, yes. Historical sources and later legends suggest he was initiated into deeply ancient mysteries in Thrace. There's a persistent legend that he underwent a severe shamanic initiation called the Thunderstone Ceremony.
That sounds intense. What is a thunderstone ceremony?
It allegedly involved isolating himself in a dark subterranean cave for a prolonged period.
Just like the sensory deprivation we talked about.
Exactly. He was essentially undergoing sensory deprivation to trigger a radical psychological breakdown and transformation before emerging as an enlightened master. It deeply echoes the initiation crises of the ancient shamans.
Wow.
But Pythagoras took this raw technique further. He used mathematics and musical harmony as his primary psychotechnologies.
Wait, math as a psychotechnology. How does doing math induce a trance?
He believed that the everyday world is messy and imperfect, but mathematics represents the pristine, eternal laws of the universe.
Okay, that makes sense.
By deeply concentrating on math and musical ratios, the human psyche could abstract itself. It could be liberated from the messy everyday world.
Like a flow state.
Yes, exactly. If you've ever watched a brilliant coder or a musician get into a flow state where they are staring at a screen or a sheet of music, hours pass in what feels like minutes. They forget to eat, their ego completely vanishes, and they become one with the logic of the code or the harmony of the music. That is what Pythagoras was cultivating.
That's amazing.
Through deep mathematical focus, his soul could fly and perceive the cosmic patterns of the universe.
That reframes everything. Doing a complex geometric proof wasn't homework. It was literally a form of spiritual soul flight. You are aligning your mind with the hidden architecture of reality.
It was a contemplative ascent. And this internalization of the flight culminates a few centuries later with the Neoplatonic philosopher Plotinus. Plotinus argued that to find true beauty, goodness, and truth, we have to turn away from the material world entirely.
He wanted people to just reject the physical world.
Yes. He actually quoted Homer's Odyssey, telling his students, "Let us flee then to our beloved homeland." But he explicitly redefined what this flight entailed.
What were his instructions? How do you flee?
He wrote, "This is not a journey for the feet, nor need you think of coach or ship to carry you away. You must close the eyes and call instead upon another vision which is to be waked within you."
Close the eyes and call upon another vision. That is the definitive turning point. The shamanic journey has moved entirely inside the human mind. The cosmos is now internal.
It has. But while this profound philosophical shift was happening in the Mediterranean, we really have to cast our gaze east, because these ancient shamanic archetypes didn't just birth Western philosophy.
Right.
They profoundly infused Eastern mysticism, medicine, and esoteric practices as well.
So if we cross the globe to Asia, how did this ancient shamanic drive manifest in places like China and Tibet? Because they didn't have Plotinus or Pythagoras?
No, but they had their own deeply rooted traditions. Let's start with China. Today, millions of people globally practice traditional Chinese medicine and Qigong.
Right, the movements and the energy work.
Yes. Qigong involves highly specific movements, breath work, and mental focus to cultivate and direct internal energy, or Kela, for health and spiritual martial arts. And the roots of this incredibly structured modern system trace back over 5,000 years to the ecstatic, wild dances of the early Wu shamans.
The Wu shamans, what was their practice like?
The Wu shamans used intense, rhythmic dance ceremonies to induce heavy trance states. They would wear the skins and masks of animals, and they would essentially dance their totems or power animals.
Okay, so they were embodying the spirits.
Exactly. They believed that through pure, uninhibited, energetic movement, they could cross the threshold and communicate directly with the spirit world.
And how did that become Qigong?
Over millennia, the raw, spontaneous ecstasy of those Wu shamans was carefully observed, codified, and structured into the various highly disciplined branches of Qigong we see today: Taoist, Buddhist, martial, and therapeutic. The wild flight became a controlled flow of internal energy.
You know, I have a question about the people actually performing these roles historically. When we talk about shamans or even mystics in pop culture, it is almost invariably an old man with a beard on a mountain. Were these practices restricted by gender historically?
Not at all. And in fact, in many of the most ancient cultures, the reality was quite the opposite. The anthropologist Wilhelm Schmidt, among others, proposed that the early religion of Inner Asian nomads was deeply associated with southern matriarchal communities.
Meaning women were in charge.
Yes, in these early societies, it was women who initially held the vital, primary shamanic roles. They were the ones who navigated the cosmos.
The original spiritual authorities, the ones braving the underworld, were women.
In many regions, yes, and we see powerful echoes of this throughout history. In Japan, for instance, the early Shinto religion, which derived from the Yayoi culture around the 2nd century BCE, was heavily shamanic and animistic.
And women ran the rituals.
The critical rituals were led by female shamans called miko. Today, the term miko generally refers to shrine maidens who assist at Shinto shrines, performing ceremonial dances. But originally, they were the ecstatic trance practitioners. They were the ones possessed by the kami, the spirits.
If women held this profound spiritual power originally, what happened to the male practitioners in those cultures? Did they just sit on the sidelines?
Well, it led to a fascinating social and spiritual dynamic. In some Eurasian traditions, as society shifted and men began to take over roles that were traditionally held by female shamans, a practice of transvestism emerged among male practitioners.
The male shamans would dress as women.
Yes. Male shamans would adopt female clothing, mannerisms, voices, and social roles during their rituals, and sometimes even in their daily lives.
Why did they do that?
The underlying belief was that to successfully access the specific spiritual energies required for the trance, the soul flight, and the healing energies that were fundamentally understood as feminine in nature, they had to physically and socially embody the feminine form. They had to cross a gender boundary to cross the spiritual boundary.
That completely upends our rigid modern assumptions about gender, power, and religion. The spiritual technology required a specific energetic polarity, and they adjusted themselves to fit it. So, moving from China and Japan, let's talk about Tibet. When I think of Tibetan Buddhism, I picture incredibly complex mandalas, thousands of texts, and deeply intellectual meditation. Is that rooted in shamanism too?
Immensely so. It is impossible to understand Tibetan Buddhism without understanding shamanism. Before Buddhism arrived in Tibet from India, the indigenous religion of the region was an ancient, deeply animistic shamanic tradition known as Burn.
Burn. Never heard of it.
It is thousands of years older than Buddhism. When Buddhism finally spread to the high Himalayas, it didn't just erase Burn, it absorbed it. It synthesized with it. Modern Tibetan Buddhism is essentially a brilliant fusion of complex Indian Buddhist philosophy and ancient Burn shamanic practice.
How does that fusion actually work in everyday practice?
A perfect example is their anatomy of the soul. Just like the ancient Egyptians with the Ka and Ba, the Burn and Tibetan traditions have a very specific technical map of human spiritual anatomy. They conceptualize multiple souls operating simultaneously, primarily the Laya and the Tusha or Sog.
Let's define those carefully. What is the La?
The La is often translated simply as soul, but that doesn't really capture the depth. It is more like your karmic trace. It is the deep repository of who you are, tying you to your fundamental human identity. It is sometimes called the breath soul.
And the Tishi?
The Tishi, on the other hand, is the life soul or the life force spirit. This is believed to be located physically in the center of the heart. It is the sheer biological instinct that opposes death.
To use a modern analogy, the La is your computer's hard drive with all your specific data and operating system, and the Tisha is the battery power keeping the screen on.
What happens if one of these gets damaged or goes missing?
If your La Artesia is weakened, fragmented, or frightened away, perhaps through severe trauma, grief, or a sudden accident, you become physically or mentally ill. You lose your vitality.
So how do they fix it? To cure this, a Tibetan shaman, or lama, performs a highly specific ritual called Lakuk Chekuk, which translates to the soul calling ritual. The practitioner literally enters a trance, a controlled soul flight, to track down the lost or weakened soul energies in the unseen realms, negotiate for their return, and forcefully call them back into the patient's body to restore wholeness.
That is straight up Stone Age soul retrieval functioning seamlessly within a highly intellectual Buddhist framework.
Exactly. But where Tibetan Buddhism really pushes the concept of inner soul flight to its absolute philosophical limits is within the Dzogchen teachings, specifically the teachings on the three lamps of inner light.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I want to spend some time on the three lamps because Tibetan philosophy can be dense, but the payoff is usually massive. Walk me through these lamps. What is the first lamp?
So Dzogchen is an esoteric tradition deeply focused on directly realizing the true nature of the mind. They describe the fundamental nature of reality not as matter, but as pure, radiant light or luminosity. The first lamp they describe is called the lamp of the empty basis, or kunzi.
When they say empty, do they mean a dark void? Nothingness.
Not a nihilistic nothingness. It's not an empty room. Think of it as the ultimate unconditioned ground of reality. It is pure, spacious potential before any specific thoughts, forms, or objects arise. It is the foundational, unbroken light of the universe itself.
Okay, I have the cosmic background light of reality. What is the second lamp?
The second lamp is the lamp of the flesh heart. This is where that universal, limitless light becomes localized within you, the individual human being.
Right, inside the person.
Yes. It is your innate, self-arising awareness, termed Rigpa. It resides physically and energetically in your heart center. It is that pure, silent presence that watches your thoughts move, but is not the thoughts themselves. It is the core of your consciousness.
The watcher behind the eyes. The part of me that knows I am listening to this conversation right now. Got it. And the third lamp?
The third lamp is the lamp of the soft white channel. This represents the mechanism of movement. It is the vital energy, or prana, that acts as a conduit. It carries the light of your awareness from your heart center, traveling through the subtle energetic channels of your body up to your eyes and out into the world.
And this is the aha moment that just blew my mind when I was reading the sources. Because in the modern West, we are entirely conditioned by basic physics to believe that light works by bouncing off objects, a tree, a car, a book, and then traveling into our eyes, hitting our retina so our brain can process it. We are passive receivers of light.
Right. That's the materialist view.
But the Tibetan Dzogchen view flips that entirely backward.
It is a radical reversal of subject and object. They use a beautiful analogy of a hollow crystal doll with a brilliant candle shining inside it.
Like a film projector, we walk around thinking the world is shining into us, but the Dzogchen tradition teaches that the light of our own innate awareness, that second lamp in the heart, travels up the third lamp, the channel, and projects outward through our eyes to actually illuminate and create the experience of the world we see.
Yes, your awareness is actively illuminating the world into existence. To put this in an everyday context, think about the last time you were in a terrible, depressed mood. You walked outside, and literally everything looked bleak, gray, and irritating.
Oh, absolutely.
Conversely, when you're deeply in love, the exact same street looks vibrant, beautiful, and full of possibility. The physical street didn't change. The light projecting from your lamp of the flesh heart changed. You are coloring the reality you walk through.
That is profound. If you take that seriously, it completely redefines what a spiritual vision is.
It does. In this view, a spiritual vision or a shamanic journey isn't a matter of your soul traveling away to a physical place in the sky.
No.
It is a matter of recognizing that every single thing you experience, whether it's an ordinary mountain, a conversation with a friend, or a profound vision of a deity in a trance, is fundamentally made of the luminous light of your own awareness projecting outward.
You don't have to climb the Axis Mundi to find heaven because the entire universe is already shining out of your own heart.
That is the ultimate enlightened realization of the inner soul flight.
Okay, so we've seen how the raw shamanic trance internalized into philosophy in Greece and how it structured itself into complex mysticism and medicine in the East. But I want to bring this back to the West, to a tradition that historically was incredibly hostile to anything resembling shamanism, paganism, or magic.
You mean Christianity?
Yeah, Christianity.
Yeah.
How does the ecstatic trance survive in medieval Europe when claiming you can talk to spirits might get you burned at the stake?
It survives because you cannot legislate away human biology and the drive for transcendence. The institutional church largely suppressed tribal pagan practices, but the human capacity for ecstasy simply reemerged within the accepted theological framework.
So they just reframed it.
Exactly. It manifested powerfully in the lives of the great Christian mystics. A prime example is St. Francis of Assisi in the 13th century.
When most people think of St. Francis, they picture the statue in a garden bird bath, the gentle patron saint of animals, usually depicted with doves on his shoulders.
The historical reality of Francis was far more intense, radical, and visceral than the garden statues imply. If you read the primary historical reports compiled in texts like the Acta Sanctorum, the ecstatic trances of St. Francis bear a striking, undeniable structural resemblance to the ancient shamanic initiation crises we discussed earlier.
How so? Give me the scene. What did his trances look like?
He was highly, almost dangerously susceptible to altered states of consciousness. The mere mention of the name of God or a concept like divine love acted as an immediate psychological trigger.
Just a word could trigger him.
Yes. When triggered, he would let out a very specific cry, instantly lose his ordinary sensory perception, and enter a state of total, rigid rapture. The monks around him knew this specific cry. It signaled he was shifting consciousness. And just like the ancient shaman's drum, music played a massive role in inducing these states.
Wait, St. Francis used music to enter trance, like a medieval psychotechnology.
Absolutely. There is a very famous, well-documented account of a Christmas Eve Mass. Francis heard local shepherds playing rustic instruments, bagpipes, and flutes. The driving rhythm of the music induced a wild, ecstatic dance.
It's just from the bagpipes.
Yes. He lost control of his normal faculties, and according to the eyewitness reports of his followers, during this intense rhythmic dance, he levitated.
He flew.
He literally flew like a bird into the air, reaching a height of 7.5 feet off the ground, moving toward the high altar, where he remained suspended in rapturous prayer for 15 minutes.
7.5 feet in the air for 15 minutes. Now, obviously, a modern rationalist or skeptic hears that and immediately says, come on, that violates the laws of physics. It's religious exaggeration or mass hysteria.
And from a strictly materialist viewpoint, that is a valid modern perspective. Mass hysteria is a documented psychological phenomenon. But within the context of the history of ecstatic religion, these accounts of levitation, what the Catholic theologian Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange categorized as ascensional ecstasy or ecstatic flight, are incredibly common and deeply documented.
So it wasn't just him.
Francis is not unique. You have St. Joseph of Cupertino in the 17th century, who reportedly flew around rooms, hovered over altars, and even flew into trees so frequently that his superiors had to ban him from attending public church services because he was too disruptive.
Whether it was a literal physical defiance of gravity or a profound, contagious, subjective psychological experience where everyone in the room felt him lift off the ground, the experience of the flight is entirely real to the practitioner and the witnesses.
Very true.
But let me challenge the comparison to shamanism here. The Stone Age shaman goes through a crisis, a dismemberment, specifically to gain power to heal the tribe. The Christian mystic seems to focus heavily on immense personal suffering, just for the sake of suffering for God. Are they really operating on the same archetype?
They are different cultural expressions of the exact same underlying mechanism. You are correct, the Christian mysticism focuses heavily on the imitatio Christi, the imitation of Christ's suffering.
Right.
St. Francis took this to the absolute extreme of physical poverty, starvation, and exposure, eventually culminating in his reception of the stigmata, the spontaneous physical appearance of crucifixion wounds bleeding on his hands and feet.
The ultimate physical manifestation of his inner focus.
Yes, but structurally, look at what is happening. Both the Christian mystic and the ancient shaman must pass through a brutal threshold of profound physical or psychological suffering.
Oh, I see it now.
The shaman is torn apart by spirits in the underworld. The mystic is pierced by the divine love of a crucified God. Both must completely surrender their ego, their physical comfort, and their ordinary identity to cross the threshold. Only by passing through that destruction do they gain spiritual authority and direct communion with the divine. The toll you pay to ride the cosmic elevator is the dissolution of yourself.
That makes perfect sense. The suffering breaks the vessel so the light can get in. But as the Middle Ages progressed, the nature of that Christian flight shifted again, didn't it? It became less about physical levitation and bleeding wounds, and much more internal, similar to what happened in the Axial Age.
Yes, the trajectory moves inward. We see a sharp contrast if we compare the externalized, highly mobile soul of the ancient Egyptians the Babbard flying physically out of the tomb, with the deepening Christian internalization of the soul.
Give me an example of that shift.
St. Augustine, writing his famous Confessions in the late 4th century, wrote extensively about the flight of the soul. But for Augustine, this wasn't a journey of seeing visions of angels or flying over altars. It was fundamentally a journey of the will.
The will, meaning your personal determination, your focus.
Yes, your moral volition. Augustine argued that you don't need literal wings to fly to heaven, nor do you need a trance. You need the wings of moral desire. You have to actively, consciously will yourself toward the divine light, pulling your attention away from the heavy darkness of earthly sin and distraction.
It's a moral flight, an attention flight. If you're listening to this and you've ever tried to sit down and just meditate for 10 minutes, or even just focus on a hard task without checking your phone, you know exactly how heavy the gravity of distraction is. Augustine is basically saying that forcing your focus upward toward the divine is the new soul flight.
Precisely. And this inward turn only deepened over the centuries. In the 16th century, the German mystic Jacob Boehm wrote about desperately wrestling with his corrupted nature until he discovered a wonderful foreign light bursting forth entirely within his own unruly soul.
Finding the light inside again.
Right. And by the 15th century, when Thomas à Kempis wrote The Imitation of Christ, one of the most widely read Christian books in history, the focus had moved completely away from the extreme, public, physical poverty of St. Francis. True spirituality had moved entirely toward an inner, quiet, devotional withdrawal from the world.
So as society modernizes, literal reports of people hovering over altars start to fade away. The scientific revolution happens, the Enlightenment dawns, we realize the Earth revolves around the sun, and the universe starts to look like a cold mechanical clock.
Yes, the world gets disenchanted.
But human biology hasn't changed. The need to journey, to experience that transcendence and break out of the mundane, it can't just evaporate. Where does it go?
It migrates into a new psychotechnology. With the invention of the Gutenberg printing press and the subsequent rise of mass literacy, the soul flight moves out of the tribal ritual, it leaves the monastic cell, and it takes up residence in literature.
Literature as a psychotechnology. I love this concept.
It is exactly that. A book is a device for altering consciousness. And the ultimate medieval literary soul flight is, without a doubt, Dante's Divine Comedy.
Oh, absolutely.
Dante Alighieri writes a massive epic poem chronicling his own first-person descent into hell, his grueling climb up the mountain of purgatory, and his final ecstatic ascent into the celestial spheres of heaven.
It is the ultimate return to the three-tiered cosmos journey. He even has a spirit guide, the poet Virgil, showing him the way, just like a shaman has a power animal or an ancestral spirit.
It hits every single archetypal note. Now, it's very easy for a modern literature student to dismiss Dante's work as just a clever, highly structured political allegory using Christian mythology to punish his enemies.
Which it also kind of was.
True. But Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist, made a brilliant assessment of the Divine Comedy. Jung argued that the true, compelling, lasting power of Dante's work does not lie in its historical or mythical material. Its power comes from the fact that it is an expression of genuine, visionary experience.
Jung is saying Dante wasn't just sitting at a desk making up a clever story. He was accessing a real, altered state of consciousness, undergoing his own psychological catabasis, and writing down the archetypes he encountered.
Exactly. Dante was undertaking a psychological soul flight. And this literary tradition explodes in the modern age as a direct reaction against the coldness of the scientific revolution.
Who came next?
In 17th century Britain, John Milton writes Paradise Lost. Milton constructs a massive cosmic narrative about the battle for the human soul fought across a strictly three-tiered cosmology of heaven, earth, and hell.
But then you get to the 18th century, the height of the Enlightenment, and things get really wild with a man named Emanuel Swedenborg.
Swedenborg is one of the most fascinating figures of this era. He was a brilliant, highly respected Swedish scientist, anatomist, and inventor. But in the 1740s, at the age of 56, he experienced a profound, shattering spiritual awakening.
What happened?
He began having intense visions and claimed that God had literally opened his spiritual eyes. He claimed he could travel freely at will between heaven and hell to speak with angels, demons, and spirits of the dead.
He was basically a Swedish Enlightenment shaman wearing a powdered wig.
Quite literally. He spent the rest of his life documenting these journeys in massive volumes, most famously his book Heaven and Hell. But Swedenborg introduced a radical psychological idea.
What was it?
He claimed there isn't just one generic heaven for the good and one generic hell for the bad. Instead, there is an infinite variety of inner heavens and hells, and they are entirely generated by the individual consciousness and spiritual state of the person. You gravitate toward the afterlife that perfectly matches your own inner nature. Heaven and hell are states of mind.
Which brings us to one of my absolute favorite figures, the poet and artist William Blake. Because Blake reads Swedenborg and essentially says, that's interesting, but you're wrong.
Blake is the ultimate visionary rebel. He was a poet and painter in the late 18th century who experienced his own profound, unprompted soul flights and visions from childhood. He wrote a deeply subversive book called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, which is a direct satirical response to Swedenborg.
Why was he rebelling? What didn't Blake like about Swedenborg's version of the cosmos?
Blake deeply detested dualism, the strict religious separation of good and evil, spirit and body, reason and energy, heaven and hell. In his own visionary journeys, Blake argued that the upper and lower worlds are not opposed enemies.
They aren't.
No, they're intimately connected, absolutely necessary parts of a single divine order. Reason is the boundary, but energy is the engine. Light and dark must be married, not separated, for a human being to be whole.
And what blows my mind about Dante, Milton, Swedenborg, and Blake is what they accomplished for the average person. Think about it. In the Stone Age, only the shaman went on the journey. The tribe just watched the performance and received the healing.
Very true.
But these authors effectively democratized the shamanic journey. If I know how to read, I can open the Divine Comedy or the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, and I can experience the ecstasy, the terror, the visions, and the transcendence of the soul flight right alongside them. The pages of the book become the drum. Reading becomes the psychotechnology.
That is a profound insight. The written word became the vehicle for mass visionary experience. It allowed the individual reader to embark on their own inner journey without needing to isolate in a cave or endure physical torture.
But the journey doesn't end with 18th century poetry. For our final conceptual leap, we have to look at the 20th century.
And this raises an important question for us today. In a fully secular scientific age, an age of MRIs and neuroscience, how does modern science and psychology interpret these ancient ecstatic soul flights?
Enter Carl Jung. You mentioned him earlier, analyzing Dante, but Jung didn't just sit back and analyze other people's visions. He went on the ride himself.
He did. From 1913 to 1930, Carl Jung embarked on what is arguably the most famous and terrifying self-experiment in the history of psychology. He was a successful psychiatrist, but he felt that modern humanity was suffering from profound spiritual alienation. We had lost our myths.
So what did he do?
He believed the only cure was to regain the soul. To do that, he deliberately engaged in a psychological descent into hell.
How exactly do you deliberately descend into hell in a comfortable study in Switzerland in 1913?
Jung developed a specific technique he called active imagination. He would induce states of deep reverie, essentially a modern, controlled, self-induced trance. And he would allow the images, archetypes, and voices of his deep unconscious to rise to the surface of his mind.
He just watched them.
No, he didn't just observe them. He interacted with them. He spoke to them, asked them questions, and sometimes fought with them.
He was conducting an inner vision quest.
Yes. He was stepping into the cosmic elevator, and he meticulously recorded every single detail of this journey. He wrote down his visions in elaborate calligraphic script and painted breathtaking, sometimes terrifying mandalas and images of the entities he encountered.
The Red Book, right.
Exactly. He bound all of this into a massive, heavy red leather volume called Liber Novus, popularly known as the Red Book.
And the Red Book was kept locked away in a vault for decades, right? It was only published relatively recently.
It was finally published in 2009, long after his death. And when you read it, you realize immediately that Jung is speaking the exact same language as the ancient shamans and the medieval mystics. He is exploring the exact same territory.
What does he actually say in it?
At one point, commenting on the Christian myth of Jesus descending into hell after the crucifixion, Jung writes that Christ had to descend to save his Antichrist. He recognized that to find true psychological wholeness, you cannot just look upward at the light. You must integrate your deepest darkness, your shadow.
That echoes William Blake perfectly, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell.
Completely. Jung wrote a profound realization in the Red Book regarding this descent. He said, "But the deepest hell is when you realize that hell is also no hell, but a cheerful heaven."
Okay, let's unpack that, because it sounds like a Zen riddle. The deepest hell is a cheerful heaven. What is he actually saying about the human mind?
He means that when you finally turn around and face the most terrifying, painful, repressed parts of your own psyche, your personal underworld, your traumas, your deepest shames, and you actively accept them and integrate them rather than fighting them or repressing them, the terror evaporates.
Wow.
The hellfire isn't burning you. It becomes the light of integration and healing. The underworld, which you feared, becomes a massive source of personal power and wholeness.
By facing the monster becomes your guide. So therapy, modern psychology really is the new shamanism.
In many deep structural ways, yes. The contrast is entirely in the literalism. The Stone Age shaman literally believed they were flying out of their physical body to a physical upper world in the sky to fight literal demon spirits that were causing a physical sickness in the village.
Right.
Modern psychology views those worlds not as physical places in the sky or under the dirt, but as the vast, infinite inner realms of the subconscious and the collective unconscious. The demons are our repressed traumas, our neuroses, and our unacknowledged fears.
So what does this all mean for us today? It means that the initiation crisis of the ancient shaman, the madness, the feeling of being torn apart by spirits, the descent into darkness, is mirrored perfectly in the psychological breakdowns, the dark nights of the soul, and the breakthroughs that people explore every single day in modern therapy. The therapist sitting across from you is acting as the guide, the modern shaman. They are helping you, the patient, navigate your own personal underworld, helping you retrieve your lost soul fragments and return to the everyday world whole again.
It is an unbroken chain of human experience stretching back to the dawn of our species. The technology changes, from a vibrating drum to a complex philosophical concept to a printed book to a therapist's couch, but the journey, the need to transcend, is exactly the same.
What an epic journey we've been on today. We started with Stone Age hunter-gatherers, shivering in the dark, entering trances to navigate a three-tiered universe.
And we traced it so far.
We really did. We watched that raw ecstasy transform into the structured, monumental power of Bronze Age pharaohs. We saw the Axial Age philosophers like Pythagoras and Plotinus flip the whole cosmos inward.
We traveled east, too.
Yeah, to the energy cultivation of the Wu shamans and the radiant inner light of Tibetan Dzogchen, realizing our eyes are projectors, not just receivers. We saw Christian mystics like St. Francis paying the toll of suffering to levitate in churches, visionary poets charting the heavens and hells of the imagination, and finally ended up in the deep psychological underworld of Carl Jung's Red Book.
And the most important takeaway for you, the listener, is that this is not just ancient history or abstract philosophy. Whether you are sitting quietly trying to focus on a meditation app, whether you are reading an incredibly immersive fantasy novel that transports you to another world, whether you are getting lost in the flow state of coding or the rhythm of music at a concert, or whether you are bravely examining your own subconscious fears in therapy, you are actively participating in the ancient, unbroken human tradition of the soul flight. You're accessing the axis mundi.
That is an incredibly empowering thought. You are part of this continuum. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final provocative question to mull over as you go about your day.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we talked about how the soul flight migrated into literature, democratizing the trance with the printing press. Today, in a modern world entirely saturated by digital virtual realities, video games, the internet, and artificial intelligence, are our glowing screens becoming the ultimate digitized middle world?
That's a fascinating angle.
Are we building a new synthetic cosmos? And if we are constantly journeying into these digital realms, who are the shamans guiding us through the digital ether? Are they the coders, the algorithm designers? Or in this new reality, do we have to learn to become our own digital shamans?
A vital, perhaps urgent question for the 21st century.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning your reality, keep exploring your inner light, and we will see you next time.